Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. Joining me today is Kurt Browning. Kurt and I are going to be discussing his career as a competitive ice skater. We talk about how he was able to achieve career longevity skating competitively into his 50s. We talk about his 4 world champion wins. We talk about issues that he faced along the way, including back pain and what he was able to do to overcome that, and so much more. Kurt is an absolute legend in the skating space, and I really appreciate his time on the podcast today. Episodes like this are made possible by our sponsor, ISOFIT. For more on ISOFIT, you can check the description below. Enjoy. Kurt, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time.
This is awesome. Yeah, finally, it's happening. It's real.
Yeah, no, definitely. Definitely. And it's funny because as we were talking, I think we had your wife, Alyssa, on the podcast a couple years ago, and she talked about her journey, using ISOFIT and isometrics to overcome multiple hip surgeries that way. For people who maybe aren't familiar with you and all the incredible stuff you've done in the world of skating and so on that way, would you mind filling in a little bit about who you are and all that you do?
Very good. Here it goes. The story of Kurt. Kurt Browning. I am Canadian and went to the rink when I was 11 and didn't leave. And somehow in that time frame, I was lucky enough to get to the rink at the right place at the right time, enough time to become a 4-time world champion. And that has kind of set me up for the rest of my life. When I meet people, I'm that skater dude. And I went on to a professional career that is longer than most. I'm kind of addicted to the sport. I love the professionalism, the musicality, and all that stuff. And but along that journey, I'm 58 now, and I still do a few shows. But essentially, 1 year ago, I basically retired from performing at what I would call high level. So, like, I still do some charity shows, some small town shows, but even that I'm probably pulling away from. But at the age of 58, it's kind of impressive that my career has lasted as long as it has. My physical history has been interesting. A lot of bad back stuff. I kind of had a chance to win the Olympics, which is, the Olympics are happening and Summer Olympics are happening right now. And every time the Olympics come up, I can't help but think back to my career and the 2 opportunities I had to win. I was a world champion at 2 Olympic Games. And my back was bad at one, and then I kind of goofed my chance at the other one. But that back stayed with me a long time. It was actually that back that had me working out with someone at Brad Thorpe's gym. So Brad Thorpe's name will pop back up, of course, in this conversation. But I'm at the gym, and my lower back was really bothering me. And then I got hit in hockey. No hit hockey, but I got hit pretty hard. So my trainer sent me to this guy named Brad Thorpe, who is a little bit of a magician, and he worked on me, but he sent me to the torture table, which is what we called it in the gym. And the torture table was a machine that had a bar that that kind of, you had to push against it. I didn't really know that much about it. I just hated it. I really, truly hated it because my trainer would always put the bar a little higher than I could hold my leg. And I really hated going there. Sure enough, this guy named Brad that I just met, who was fixing me, takes me out to the table, and he starts working with my shoulder, which is where I had nerve damage from the hit in hockey. And it wasn't torturous, actually. It was actually kind of calm, and it was pleasant. It was in my range of motion, and I left those sessions with Brad feeling very different about the machine. So to make a very long story short, he asked me if I would try a trial, which was 5 days on, 2 days off, 5 days on, with 5 or 6 other strangers. They weighed you, they measured you, they did different things, and he filmed the whole thing, and I'm sure it's all documented somewhere. And during those 10 days of doing what we call exercise 30 and 30, number 1, which is 30 exercises in 30 minutes, we did the same group of exercises 10 times. I lost 3.5 pounds. I had been kind of quit skating at that time, to be honest, which is why I was playing hockey again, kind of saying that's it for my professional career. I've had a great long career and that's enough. But during that 10 days, I kind of fell in love with the idea of feeling better again. And my shoulder came back. I was able to do something called the tripod, which you, of course, know what that is. It's one of the exercises. And after 10 days, I could do that again. And I was hooked. That was it. And some people I show it to, kind of think, oh, it doesn't seem like I'm doing anything. But I felt very different. And I felt like this is something that I need in my life. And one of the biggest complaints I had, I think you're not doing any questions because I'm doing all the talking, but one of the biggest complaints I had is that as I was 40, 45, 50, I would exercise, trying to stay in shape so I could do my professional skating shows. And then I would be sore. So my skating would be screwed for 48 hours. Then I would be feeling better the third day. Then I would exercise and repeat that. So I wasn't old enough or smart enough, or my trainer was too hard on me. I hated this reoccurring thing. But with ISOFIT, I was never sore and I felt great on the ice. So I got hooked. So Brad Thorpe has become a big part of my life. And full disclosure, I'm now, believe it or not, I'm an investor in the company. So I'm Brad Thorpe's boss.
Is there anyone that can boss that man around? I mean,
no, nobody. Maybe his daughter.
Yeah, I was going to say it's so funny that you mentioned his name, because recently we had a guy named Tyler Lesher on the podcast, great athletic trainer doing amazing work in the rehab space. And in that episode, we ended up referring to Brad as the ISO god, for lack of a better way to put it. You know, the work he's done is absolutely revolutionary that way. And, you know, kind of running it back through your story that way, I think that a lot of times people look at a sport like ice skating on the TV and they think, oh my goodness, it looks effortless. It looks majestic. It's more of an art form to some people than a sport, but they don't realize the amount of hours that goes into making it look that effortless, or the amount of impact that you all are taking on your body when you're doing some of these different things, right? Like, you know, I flip it on, you know, on a YouTube video or something like that, and I see videos of y'all jumping and landing on one leg while spinning on the ice. And it's like, you know, I certainly wouldn't have the coordination to do that. I'd eat it every single time. But you can make something as simple as jumping and landing while sliding on ice and spinning in the air look so easy. But I think understanding that there's a lot of force production that needs to go from the body in order to take that jump, force absorption in order to land from that jump, a lot of skill requirement, and so many hours of practice that go into that, that you're right. You know, I think a lot of times athletes do fall into that traditional model of strength training or weightlifting because they've been told it's good for them, it's important for their sport, and they're right. It is good to get stronger. However, when you know, your sport demands 3, 4, 5 hours a day of practice, you might not have the ability to go and spend 60 to 90 minutes in the weight room. And you're right. I think a lot of people do feel sore and beat up and run down afterwards. And I think this is a point where that overcoming isometric concept that ISOFIT does so well can really enter the chat, because, you know, plain and simple, Brad's motto is win more and hurt less. And I think every athlete wants to do those things. And it certainly sounds like you're able to win a lot, having 4 world championships under your belt that way. And it sounds like, at least with your back and your shoulder, you're able to hurt less through the impact that isometrics had on you that way.
Yeah, I think that finding it right at the end of my career, I mean, it would have been, of course, it's always nice to find something good sooner. But like I was telling in my story, I was playing hockey because I thought I was done. I was kind of shifting away from it. I was trying to quit. My career, through coincidence, you mentioned my wife, she's a skater as well, as you know. And so I wanted to extend my career unexpectedly, and I wouldn't have. I'm pretty sure that I just wouldn't have, because I wouldn't have been able to do exactly what you said, like really put in the time and the recovery. I couldn't do the recovery. So I felt really quick on the ice. One of the things that skating doesn't show is the quickness that it takes. When you watch a batter trying to hit a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, you can see how quick things are happening. But in skating, they skate in beautifully, the arms go out, and then they float up in the air and they rotate and they land. But we have to fire our muscles so fast. We're only in the air. A huge jump is 0.8 seconds. So if you're doing 4 revolutions in 0.8 seconds, you're doing, I don't know, 380 RPM. But that doesn't include rotating, and then, like you said, having to slow it down to land. So we're kind of superhuman little creatures, the way that the 4 revolution works. But it doesn't work if you can't fire quickly. And people don't understand that when they watch somebody hold an isometric pose for 45 seconds, say, it doesn't look like you're training how you would move quickly. But being able to teach the body to fire, it's actually the very first thing that happens in a tennis swing, in a goalie save, in a figure skating jump, is contracting isometrically. And until you do that contraction, you can't do the movement. So I feel like that's helped me at 56, 57, 58 be fast enough to still have triples in my program. Well, now technically it's triple. I just always did one, but at least I was still turning 3 times in the air and giving the crowd that little check mark that, hey, he's still viable because he's still doing a triple in his program, even though he's almost 60. And I think that ISOFIT gave me that.
Yeah, and it's like at this point, like, the sky's the limit for what you're going to be able to accomplish, right? Like you're doing a triple at 58. Who's to say you can't do a triple at 60, at 65, right?
Well, I better start working harder than I am right now. I retired on June 4th last year, and I'll be honest, I kind of stepped away from everything. I just took a mental break, I took a physical break, and now I've got a few extra pounds that I don't want, and I'm starting to try and get back in shape. So and missing my body now that I'm been about 5 weeks that I've been doing ISOFIT regularly again. I'm going to start picking up the pace, and my body's like, welcome back. Like I can feel even if I'm just walking, I'm walking my dog, I'm like, I can feel each step instead of kind of slugging along. And so I'm excited to get back in shape. I'm not sure I'll be doing triples anymore, but maybe.
Yeah, fingers crossed. You mentioned that you're using ISOFIT to help yourself kind of recondition and get back in shape for sport, so to speak, right now. What's your approach to using the ISOFIT devices that you have at home that way? Are you a 30 and 30 through and through guy, or what kind of things do you like with them?
So I'm trying to get back into 30 and 30. When I came back, I was just kind of on the machine. And then on the wall over there, I have all 15 printed out 30 and 30 workouts. And I start at number 1 and I kind of go through them. I'll be honest, I've been back for 5 weeks. The other day I did number 11 and I was a puddle. I was a mess. Like, oh man, these things were easy ish before. And now I can tell that I'm 15 seconds and I'm already shaking. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of embarrassing, but it's okay. When you let things go, it takes a while to get things back. So I mostly do 30 and 30 because, as Brad says, hey, I designed them that way for a reason. So when you start doing your own thing, yeah, it's okay, but you're not really doing it. So I really try and do the 30 and 30 as much as I can.
Yeah, no, and I think that's an important point. And it's funny because just earlier today, I was talking with a strength coach about 30 and 30 that way. And we were talking in relation to his current programming. I was like, well, how many leg movements, how many core movements, how many upper body movements do you program for your athletes? He's like, well, with the time we have, we're getting like maybe about 2 or 3 each. And I was like, so you're getting 2 or 3 each in your hour time session. So about 9 different exercises. What if you could get 10 each in a 30-minute time span? And he was like, wait a second, you're telling me I could get 3 times the amount of exercises in half the time? I was like, yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what I'm telling you. It can be done. Like, this is literally the method that Brad has developed that way through 30 and 30. And it just kind of baffled him. From his programming standpoint, he was lucky to get the kids through 9 or 10 exercises. And here we are getting people through 30 exercises in half the time. And I think anyone who's tried to hold a 45-second isometric can tell you that it's very intense if done correctly, but it can also be scaled because it's all about how much you're pushing or pulling. So if you do feel a little bit more sore that way, or you're doing it after practice or whatever it is, that way you just don't have to push as hard. That's the beauty in it. It's not like weight in the sense that, 25 pounds is always 25 pounds. You can change whatever your resistance is by just pushing more or pushing less.
In a millisecond, right? And your body will sometimes make that decision for you. I mean, Brad explained it to me once. He held out a little weight and he said, this is 2 pounds. This is 2 pounds above my head, but hanging out here, it's not 2 pounds anymore. It's actually heavier. Like and then as your body gets fatigued, you're lifting up that weight. At which point are your brain going to be able to tell you something's going to get hurt very soon? It doesn't. You push through. But on an ISOFIT situation, when your shoulder starts to fail, you instinctively don't push as hard. You're protected from injury, which is why it was historically used to recover from surgery and injury. So it's a very, very safe way to become super strong and fit. And it, like Brad says to me, he goes, use the ISOFIT to make a foundation for your physical fitness home. And then from there, go play tennis. From there, do weightlifting. From there, do, plyometrics, or whatever it is else you want to do, but use isometrics as the foundation first.
So if you don't have the foundation in an isometric, then, everything else you're building is, basically a house without that foundation, and it's going to collapse at some point.
Yeah, I agree. Oh, trust it will. I've proven it over the years. But I had a tennis player once go, have you ever seen my swing and my serve? It's almost 360 degrees. Like it's what you're just going to tell me to just hold one spot. And I said, well, if you want to work on your serve, then just lay down your back and put it back here. And then push, and then move it a bit, push, change your body a bit, push. You can work the whole range. And so it's really, I tell people when I introduce it to them, I said, there is a lot of creativity in this, actually. You can do your 30 and 30, which is preset by Brad, and we both are fans of that. But, when I have something hurting, like a little hamstring or something like that, I'll attack that area and really give it 10 or 15 minutes of attention. And with Brad's permission, like I go into him and I go, this hurts. And he'll just set me up on the table and walk away. Do it again. I'm like, this is the 4th time in a row. And he goes, I know, I can count. So it's interesting. And so I will have a small little irritation in my body, but I'll come down here and I'll actually work that area. And it's amazing. The blood flow comes in and everything realigns. And that's another thing. I don't know if you've ever noticed how much isometrics realign someone's body. Like, so I can feel my hips out, and then after about 3 exercises, it goes clunk all by itself, and I'm like, oh, I have access to my glutes again. I've always been fascinated by the thrown in added bonus of chiropractic work as you do isometrics.
I mean, you're hitting on a variety of different points there on the ISOs, Kurt. I mean, just to kind of run it back, I think that isometric exercise in general has a really powerful analgesic effect. And that's why I'm a huge fan of it so much in rehab, because a lot of times I get these acute injuries that are very flared up and irritated. And it's like, how can I calm this down quickly? Because, as we talked about with your wife there in the past podcast, a lot of times insurance-based PT has a very limited amount of visits. So you really have to be able to move the needle forward for people really, really quick. And if you can't do that, then they end up kind of stuck on their own without any results. So having the ability to load people isometrically in rehab settings has definitely helped us, reduce pain very quickly. Like, I've had cases of, patellar tendinopathy sent to me that we're able to get calmed down in about 4 or 5 visits. And it's like, this isn't rocket science. It's just, conceptually, we're loading not just that tendon. Like you mentioned, you like to load the area that's irritated, such as your hamstring, but I'll take it a step further. I also want to load everything below and everything above. Because if we think about things through a force standpoint, right, a lot of times people get issues with tendons or issues at the muscle tendon junction. So different soft tissue structures, they just get inflamed and irritated. So tendons transmit force. So obviously we can load that tendon, increase our strength there, reduce our pain there through the analgesic effects. And obviously a blood flow and circulation effect as well is always good. But hypothetically, what if we load all of the other tendons above and below? Because, we look at a sport like you mentioned, ice skating, or you mentioned tennis, something like that. You're never using just one muscle at a time. You're never using just one tendon at a time. It's the entire body working cohesively together. So I like to kind of load a little bit of everything from an ISO standpoint. So, if someone's coming to me with that patellar tendonitis or, a flared up hamstring or whatever it is, like, yes, I'm going to load that area, but I'm also going to load the foot, the ankle, the hip higher up. And I also want to hit the other side as well, because I've seen a lot of times where people, it's like, hey, my left side's feeling pretty bad today. And I was like, okay, well, we'll get that right. But I also want to make sure we don't neglect the right side, because, a lot of these different injuries, even in the ACL world, go on Google and punch in the stats for the amount of people who tear one ACL, come back from surgery, come back from rehab, and tear the other ACL on the other side. So, I think that we have to understand that the body is incredibly complex. And, while it's easy to try and look for a simple solution to everything, in reality, complex problems sometimes require a complex solution. And we have to be able to address everything and not just the one thing that people are there for.
Sounds like one-stop shopping.
I mean, that's what we're here for, though, right? And I mean, I think that's why the ISOFIT product is something, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that's part of the reason you wanted to invest into it that way is, you probably saw the potential of how much this can do and how good you feel from using it. And you were like, you
Yeah.
know what? This is something I really need to get involved in.
Well, also I see like now that I'm taking a step back from performance, what do I do, right? What do I do for a living? How do I pay the bills? And one of my favorite things is I don't want to be a coach. I don't want to have my own students and put them on the ice. But I do love working with adult skaters. So that could mean anything from somebody who is a junior Canadian champion and at the age of 25 wants to keep their skills up, or somebody at the age of 60 who's putting on skates for the very first time. Working with adult skaters is a lot of fun, and it seems that my personality kind of works for that era. I also thought bringing ISOFIT with me and incorporating that into my teaching of these adults is a perfect synergy. So as far as being an investor in the company, I just thought this is also a company I want to be a part of. I like the energy. I like the fact that I think that all sorts of people, young and old, could use this. And it's something I want to do for the rest of my life and share with other people.
On the performance side for a second, when you have athletes that you work with using ISOFIT around the same time they're doing a skating session with you, do you notice any change in their on ice performance? Are they able to pick up new skills or learn new skills faster? Are they more like, I guess I want to say, robust on the ice? Or do you notice any correlation between what you see from skaters on the ice and what you do with them isometrically that way?
Well, I'm probably going to answer this question strangely, but here goes. Here's the truth. Other than Alyssa, I don't know of any other skater who has used it enough to see a difference. I've had a couple of skaters dabble or try it, and I think that I haven't really tried to push it onto the other skaters too much, because I don't want to be that friend who's overstepping their limit, because everyone thinks they've got their own plan, and that's cool. Like you don't want to push. But I haven't really had anybody except for Alyssa and myself really buy into this enough to see. And it's frustrating for me a little bit. I've got a few adult skaters that are starting to do it, and I'll be interested to see the results, but that's new, and I don't have enough information to tell you. I can only tell you how, for example, for me, I feel aware of my body. I feel like I can tell it what to do, that it's going to listen to me, and I trust it. So when I'm going into a jump, I'm like 57 years old, but I trust. I really trust, and that gives you confidence, and then you act naturally. If you don't trust in skating, if you don't trust something, then you get affected, your shoulders get higher, and you change the technique. And that is death in skating, because as I told you, 0.8 seconds goes pretty fast. So I think that's what it's given me. I wish I had some way of answering that question a little bit more authentically. But skaters have coaches, and it's hard to convince people that doing nothing, because that's what it looks like. Holding an isometric hold is actually conducive.
I love it, Kurt. And it's so funny because as you were talking, I realized like how easy it is, like you mentioned before, to take the ISOFIT device and the concepts underlying isometric training and really be able to apply them to any kind of sport or any kind of position that you want to address and work on and train. And going back to what I mentioned a second ago from a motor learning standpoint, I think it might be too early to see the results across the board, like you mentioned, because the use of ISOFIT has not necessarily been applied to, 10,000 skaters yet, for example.
Yeah.
However, I think when you can take these kinds of positions that people might struggle with on the ice, or maybe they struggle with the transition, but you as a coach have the eye to be able to look at it and say, well, this is where they're struggling, getting them in that position and then teaching them how to build tension in it isometrically, to me, from my mind and from a
Makes sense.
theoretical standpoint, makes a lot of sense, because now the body's kind of learning, oh, this is how we generate force in this position. This is how we produce muscle tension. This is how we stabilize our joints in this position. And I think that there's a lot of potential for carryover between what you just showed and, especially for those learning different kind of skills that way, being able to break it down piecemeal that way and learn how to kind of get into certain positions and then hold those positions as well.
Even though it's a beautiful flowing sport, it's surprising how many positions in our sport are isometric. Alyssa teaches; she's one of the best spinners in our sport that the sport has ever seen. So she teaches a lot of spins. She'll put her students into the necessary position in the spin, and then allow them to exert in an isometric hold within the position. And it also makes you strong in that position. It also saves ice time. Like if I'm going to work on my landing position, you don't want to be skating around just holding a landing position. You want to be doing complicated things because ice time is expensive. So you spend your time in the isofit. You are making yourself really strong in that position. That's your goal, that's your finishing goal. But also, and I want to ask you a question. It's kind of like memorizing the position, because I hold it for 45 seconds and I feel it's a journey. It's an interesting journey, that 45 seconds, mentally as well as physically. And it's kind of like my body is learning how to be strong and how to change certain things. Like at 28 seconds, I might go, oh, I'm starting to give, but then I'll re-fire and I'm like, oh, I'm much stronger now. It's like I'm learning how to use my body, because I didn't just lift a weight, put it back down. I actually held it for a long time, and it gives you time to learn what it feels like to be strong in that position. And I think that's a question I wanted to ask you, because you obviously have a lot of people who are new when you throw them onto the machine in your situation. So I was curious what their journey is like during that 45-second hold.
The majority of the time I start after their first one and I ask them the question, have you ever felt anything like that before? And almost every single time I get the answer, no, I've never felt anything like that before. And it's always interesting to me, because a lot of people that I work with, they know what hard training is and they know what hard workouts are. And then, we smoke them with a single 45-second ISO. So clearly to me, I think that it's something where, we might have done hard work through similar movements or similar positions in the past, right? Like, you showed the Zercher split squat position, and it's like I do those with a barbell in my own workouts, right? With a bar. And, some of the other movements that we train a lot isometrically with the ISOFIT, athletes are very familiar with. Take, the deadlift, for example. A lot of athletes, if they're coming to me, they've done a deadlift before at some point, the majority of them anyways. But then we put them, maybe at the 30-degree or 45-degree angle, and we have them deadlift and just pull. And all of a sudden, 10, 15 seconds in, it's like full legs shake. And then they start telling me, wow, I feel it here now, and I've never felt it here. And it's like, when we look at some of those different movement patterns, like the deadlift, for example, realistically speaking, almost every muscle in the body should be active. Your foot, your lower leg, your leg musculature, whether it's posterior chain hamstrings and glutes that way, all the way up through your back. Like, I think a lot of people misunderstand training of the torso complex, and they think that, if they feel it in their back, they're doing it wrong. Going back to your story on back pain for a second that way, I think that the more we kind of teach people to avoid feeling anything in their back, the more we develop this sort of fragile mindset that way, when in reality, there's a lot of muscles.
The detour around the back, keep detouring around the back instead of learning how to use it.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many muscles there. And if you don't believe me, look up, anatomical dissections, cadaver anatomy, that sort of thing. That way, there's so many muscles there. They're very, very strong muscles at that. So this area is so well supported, and yet we don't train it. And I think, that old catchphrase, if you don't use it, you lose it. That goes for muscles in the back, but that also goes for any of these different movement patterns as well. If you go 6 months without ever doing a lunge, and then you go back and try and do it, it's probably going to feel a little bit different to you. And again, you mentioned that everything starts isometrically that way. Well, if we're going to restart a movement pattern that we haven't done in a prolonged period of time, maybe starting with an ISO would be a good way to do it. And I think the other piece too is just from a safety standpoint. When I work with athletes, the last thing I want them to experience is getting injured while working in physical therapy. That's not really good for business.
That would be detrimental against the process. Sure.
I really like to start things isometrically. Even, take any kind of post-op, say post-op ACL, for example. We start them with quad ISOs, plain and simple. So it's like, if I'm comfortable starting someone who just had a major surgery with isometric exercise, and again, this is my opinion, my take, my practice that way, I'm going to have other athletes do that as well, right? Like, if you're coming into me with a lot of pain and, your body is perceiving that the tissue has experienced trauma, then if I start you with ISOs, what could come from that, I guess. And the majority of the time, it's all those good things that we've talked about. So,
And it is, as you said, not the experience that people like. Nobody does it instinctively. Like, the body starts to quiver at 15 seconds, so everyone stops. So if I have a friend or a fellow skater or something on the machine, and I'm showing them an exercise, and I said, go ahead and try it. 12, maybe 15 seconds, everyone stops. 90% of everyone stops. And I'm like, okay, do you want to try a real one? And they're like, well, I just did. And I go, no, that's not really how the process works. You have to sustain the hold. And so then we'll do 45 seconds, and you could just see in their eyes, like, this is the longest of my life. And it's but I like it. I also like, literally, and this is a bit of an admission of guilt, I can come down here with jeans on, and 30 minutes later, I'm not even sweating or anything. I just feel lined up. I feel turned, like my muscles are turned on, and I'm body aware. I'm a tiny bit stronger. I don't have to kill myself. I can just do 60% and then walk out of the house. And I don't know, it's just such a friendly way of getting super killer strong.
To your point there on the 45-second ISO and the face people are making and tapping it out early and all that sort of thing, I think you'll agree in that pretty much any sport is endurance based to a certain extent, whether it's skating and being able to perform, the types of, movements and that sort of thing that you have to do for the length of the practice, the length of your ice time, or the length of your routine, or, any other sport you can think of, whether it's lacrosse or whatever. That way, there's an endurance element in it. And I think a lot of times we start telling athletes, hey, stop training because you're overdoing it, or, hey, you're going to get too tired, or, hey, your velocity, we're using velocity-based tracking, and your velocity on the bar, it dropped too much. So you need to stop and rest before we can do another set. And I think that we've lost this concept of training in a fatigued state, when in reality, every athlete is going to experience a fatigued state when they're in sport. Everyone's going to get tired at some point. And if you've never trained when you start to get tired, then how are you going to perform? Versus if you're already used to putting in long bouts of efforts, 45 seconds might not sound like a long time until you do it. Some of these ISOs that we show people can be incredibly intense if you scale them as such. So I think having the ability to train safely, as you mentioned, and in a method that is kind of up to your own resistance level, whether it's you're pushing 10% or you're pushing 90% for a prolonged period of time, opens up the opportunity to train someone in a fatigue state, in a safe method or a safe environment that way.
No, it does. I like the way you talk about it, because it kind of, it's always fun to talk to somebody that uses isometrics, and to see it from a full 360 degree, like, of how you use it and how you see it. I'm using it on a very personal level. I've had classes all around the world online where I'm showing skaters and to do a workout, and getting creative, because they have chairs and they have a door frame, or they have a desk. They don't obviously have the nice MSK machine. So it's also available for people to do in their small apartment, and while you're watching television. If you're sitting on the couch holding a Swiss ball up and squeezing it with your legs, and then putting your one leg on the Swiss ball and pushing down, there's all sorts of creative ways to use isometrics. One is in the bank. So if you're at the bank, or you're getting your driver's license renewed and you're in a long lineup, what a great place to sneak out some isometrics. So if you're standing there, you can, squeeze to roll your feet in and count to 45, and then push your feet out. You're not moving. You're just standing there. Then I'll put one foot ahead of myself and bring my legs together. But of course, nothing's moving. So nobody knows that you're exerting yourself. It's a pretty sneaky little place to exercise.
Yeah, no, that's funny. That's funny. We're just going to have to call you like the ISO everywhere guy then, I guess.
Yeah. We've gone long. We drove all across the United States, and we were like, okay, for the next 45 minutes, we're going to do isometrics in the car. So you're driving with one hand, pushing up on the roof and the other, and the beeper goes off. You're like, whew, okay, next. And we, when you got 6 hours of driving that day, you kill 40 minutes doing isometrics in the car.
Yeah, no,
So
that's a great way to do it. And now too, ISOFIT has the straps that way, which make it real
yeah,
easy to travel with something to do isometrics with.
I'm spoiled because with the machines that I have here, the transition between exercises is so quick. But with the straps, you just have to be a little bit more patient. But I've used it on the dock by the lake, and it's when the dock's moving a little bit, it's pretty cool. I've even went out on the paddleboard and was doing it on the paddleboard, and yeah, it's fun because it's a small little thing, but you can stay in touch with it. And I think that that's what I got to get back into is regularly. It doesn't matter how good any program is; it doesn't seem to work if you don't do it. I've noticed that over the last year. So I want to make sure that I'm getting way more consistent, and I like building it up to being at least 5 30 and 30s a week, and then from there, from there, if you really want to feel great, you can start using some. I wanted to ask you a little bit about stretching, putting yourself in, like, for example, that's about as far back as my arm wants to go comfortably. And if I had a bar right there, then I could exert myself at range. And I feel that that's kind of because I call it the reaching into the car and getting the last bag of groceries and lifting it out and not hurting your shoulder, because you're at your farthest range, and that's when you hurt yourself. Do you have any thoughts on that? Because I try to train every once in a while at my range.
Yeah, so I think your concept of end range and then building isometric strength in that position is
Carefully.
absolutely essential. And I think that's something that's often overlooked. And I see it all the time in, what I call the next generation of athletes that way, the high school and college crowd that way. A lot of them are told, hey, you're feeling tight. You need to stretch more. Or, hey, things aren't moving the way they should. Just go stretch more. And I think that for the longest time, we've looked at stretching as the answer to everything, when in reality, the majority of them have more than enough movement. So we have the difference of what we call passive range versus active range. So passive being what I can move someone into, and active being what they can achieve themselves. And I think a lot of times we see a huge mismatch there where I can passively put people into these extremes of range of motion. Like I've got a couple video clips that way where I'm able to take, a high school college girl's hip and internally rotate her 90, 100, 110 degrees easily without resistance. And then I have them actively do it and they can barely get half that range. So I think that this is a spot
That's
where
interesting.
ISOs are incredibly important, because now we can put them into these new ranges that they can move into, but have no idea how to stabilize in, how to control, how to even actively get there. And then we can teach them how to build stability, how to build tension there isometrically. So I think that the end range ISO is an absolutely essential piece to that puzzle. And, in the back of my mind as well, to me, if I have the ability to move into a position, but I don't have muscular control over it, to me, that just strikes me as an injury risk factor, right?
For
So, like,
sure.
if my knee can move into a certain position and I can't control that, then something's got to take the brunt of the force there, whether it's a ligament or a meniscus or whatever it is that way. So I think that the more we kind of teach our athletes, and again, this is regardless of the lifespan that way. I don't care if you're a 15-year-old field hockey player or a 60-year-old pickleball player, whatever it is that way. If you've got some
That's
kind
me
of
in a few years.
deficit, Kurt Browning, pickleball champion.
Yeah.
I think that if you find spots of limitation or find spots where it's like, hey, I know I can get there, but it's just so weak there. I think having the ability to attack it isometrically is an essential piece.
Yep. Yeah, it's smart. And I think that it's interesting that when I'm doing it on my own, which is 99% of the time, and then occasionally I'll be doing it with other people or Brad will be around, and then you get corrections
Yep.
because we instinctively do it the way that feels good or the way that works for us. But it's not always the right way. It's just the comfortable way. And so it takes a little humiliation to every once in a while do it in front of somebody who can correct you, because it looks easy. You squat down to get under the bar and you push, but your back is too round or your knee isn't over top of your foot, and there's all sorts of little corrections. So it's good every once in a while to do it with some professional who's taking a good look at you.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Kurt. And I realize that, we're both maybe a little biased in how much we like ISOFIT for some reason. But I think at the end of the day, when it produces the kind of results that you and I get to see and experience ourselves on the day to day, I think we're right to be a little bit biased that way. But we could probably talk about it until we're blue in the face for hours and hours that way. For people who are interested in hearing more about you or reaching out and getting in touch with you, I know you said you're like 57, but I'd imagine you've got to have some kind of social media presence, correct?
Barely. Yeah, I'm on Instagram, maybe on ice, I think it is. There might be a dot in there somewhere. And, but I'm pretty quiet that way. I think real soon, I'm going to have a website with Alyssa, and that I think that will be the place. And I think it's going to be called Adult Skating Stuff. And so then that's, because it's going to be talking about mental awareness. It's going to have off ice lessons. It's going to have on ice lessons. And hey, we're having a seminar, and that's where you'd find out about it. So that's hopefully something that's coming down the pipe. Last year was a big year. My first year not as a skater, and I choreographed Stars on Ice, which has been my mainstay of work this tour. And I think now this year it's like, okay, it's time to figure out life after, bowing at center ice. And so I'm hoping that ISOFIT will be a little bit more a part of that, and also working with adult skaters. So stay tuned, everybody. I'm gonna be there doing
That's
something.
that's awesome. We'll link to all that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there. I guess we'll have to work on getting you and Alyssa on the TikTok together then, huh? I was gonna say you probably don't even know what TikTok is.
I don't. I think it. I don't think I have it on my phone. No, I think it's true.
Kurt, it was a real pleasure getting to talk with you today, man. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, all the work that you've done from the ice skating side of things to the ISOFIT side of things. And I'm really excited to see what's to come for you, man. I really appreciate your time and everything you're doing.
I appreciate the motivation too. I was gonna do a 30 and 30, but you called and said, "Hey, I'm a little bit early in the schedule. Let's do it." So I'm gonna do it right now, and I'm gonna be having all your words in my mind while I work out. It's nice to be motivated, but also it is a little tiny bit frustrating that it is such a beautiful way to work out, such a beautiful way to age and still stay in shape and stay viable. I really hope that more people do learn about it. And, I'm an investor too, so I hope it pays off eventually someday. So I think it would be great. The more people learn about it, the more people can join me in this wonderful way of exercising and staying strong and staying healthy.